An exhibit at the Missouri History Museum throws light on the Civil War in Missouri. That's our topic next on City Corner. And welcome to City Corner. Well, today we're going to talk about the Civil War in Missouri. That is the topic of an exhibit at the Missouri History Museum. And from the museum, please welcome our guests, Elizabeth Pickard and Daniel Gonzalez. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Elizabeth, why are we talking about the Civil War in Missouri at this point in time?
Because it is the 150th anniversary of the Civil War. And in fact, the exhibit opened last year, which would have commemorated the start of the war, and will continue through 2013.
You know, is that unusual for an exhibit, and I don't know, to be up that long at the museum?
It is a little bit unusual for it to run for quite that long, but of course it's a big topic and deserves a lot of emphasis, so we're delighted to have it open for as long as it is.
Daniel, you've been pretty instrumental, I think, in putting the exhibit together. Did you come on board for this particular project?
Yeah, I did. I started at the museum working on the website for this exhibition, which is www.civilwarmo.org, and then transitioned working on researching and doing some of the writing for the label copy in the exhibition.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that website. We're gonna have that come up later in the program, because that's a place people can go, I guess, to find out even more, right?
Absolutely. There are resources there for teachers, just for people who would like to delve a little more deeply into the Civil War. Primary sources are available, all sorts of things.
And later in the program, in the second half, we have a really exciting clip to share, because Metro Theater Company did a play at the Missouri History Museum and had a run there, and it was pretty exciting and did really well, as I understand.
It did. It broke records of attendance for us. It ran for 3 weeks in January. It was a tremendously strong production, targeted at family audiences, but really appropriate for all ages. We had hundreds and hundreds of school children come to see the play, and it was a really great experience working with Metro Theater Company and having them there at the Missouri History Museum.
Battle Drum.
Battle Drum, that was the name of it.
So we'll
yes.
sample that a little bit later in the program. Daniel, let's talk a little bit about the war. Missouri is an interesting place to be, if I can put it that way, in the Central War, because we were a border state, so we all know the stories, you know, the brother against brother, that sort of thing. It really tore people apart here.
Yeah, it really was, and that was one of the themes that we wanted to really play up in the exhibition, is this idea of a state that was really divided. Lincoln wrote a letter at the beginning of the war talking about Missouri, and he identified all of these various different identities that Missourians took on. And as the war progressed, those identities coalesced into these two factions, and you had really what we're calling a war of no quarter. This was a war that every man, woman, and child, everybody was drawn into in some way. So it really was.
But it's true to say that there are probably families that they'd argue about it at the dinner table, and maybe half the family felt one way, half the family was with the Union, half the family with the Confederacy. I mean, that literally happened, didn't it?
Absolutely. Sam Hildebrand, who was one of the most notorious guerrillas operated in Missouri, one of these partisans that was outside of any formal army, but would take action on their own. He was fighting for the Confederate cause. His brother actually joined the Union Army. So you really did have these brothers, this brother against brother that you were talking about happening on the ground in Missouri.
Now, Elizabeth, were you an expert on the Civil War before this exhibit?
I was not an expert on the Civil War before this exhibit.
I don't know if you're an expert now.
I wouldn't claim to be one now, no. But of course, Missouri's history is so uniquely different, really, than anywhere else in the country, that I've been drawn in.
Well, that's my question, too. Were there other states like Missouri, the circumstances that you just described, or how unique were we in that, split feelings about it?
Sure. No, I think there were certainly other states. As you said, Missouri was one of these border states, like Kentucky, like Maryland. But what was unique about Missouri was the pervasiveness and the level of violence that was involved with the guerrilla warfare and this war of no quarter that I was talking about. It really was north, south, east, west. Wherever you went, there were these gangs of partisans, these gangs of guerrillas or bushwhackers operating, cutting telegraph lines, blowing up bridges, burning homes, stealing, pillaging.
And wasn't it odd too, like the lack of uniforms? I mean, sometimes what I'm trying to get at is sometimes you couldn't tell whose side people were on.
Yeah, yeah. So you had all these different factions fighting. You had in the Union Army, you had the formal federal troops. You also had Missouri militia. On the Confederate side, you had formal Confederate troops and a different Missouri militia. You also had these guerrillas that I was talking about, and each of them had different uniforms. In some cases, did not have proper uniforms. Were wearing what they brought from their homes. In the case of guerrillas, it was interesting. Obviously, they don't have uniforms. They're just individuals acting on their own. But as the war went on, they really took on their own personas, and you had almost a pseudo-uniform for guerrillas.
Oh, really?
You had these slouch hats, overshirts that were embroidered. So they really did take on their own identities.
Were any of them, is mercenaries the right term? Did everyone fight because of a strong belief they had, or did some people choose a side for money or gain?
Yeah, absolutely. So some people came into guerrilla warfare because they had strong feelings about Missouri joining the Confederacy, trying to draw Missouri to the Confederacy. Others simply were looking for something fun and exciting to do, were drawn into it that way. And others, like you said, were looking to steal and pillage. And in fact, some of the leaders of Quantrell's gang, William Quantrell, had one of the largest bands of guerrillas operated in the western part of the state. Some of his lieutenants, kind of the seconds in command, they had no affiliation with the Southern cause. Some of them had been in the Union Army previously. So yeah, some of them were looking to take advantage of the chaos and make profit, make gain on their own.
We have some pictures from the exhibit we're going to look at in just a moment, Elizabeth. Before we do that, though, could you give us sort of an overview on what's on display at the Missouri History Museum, what you have?
Sure. Goodness, there's tons of amazing things there. One of the things that I think people who came to see Battle Drum resonated with especially was a little tiny uniform belonging to a little boy named Jimmy Johnston. His father was a Union gunboat captain, and he and his mother had gone to visit his dad, and the boat was unexpectedly attacked. The little boy who was in charge of running gunpowder to the sailors was taken down, and Jimmy, at the age of 6.5, jumped in and ran through this battle, delivering gunpowder to the sailors so that they eventually were able to prevail. And this little miniature, correct in every detail, U.S. Navy uniform was a gift to Jimmy from the sailors aboard that vessel for his service.
The whole thing about young people serving or being involved in the Civil War is something we'll talk a little bit more about when we look at the clip from Battle Drum. It's an amazing thing. How many items roughly are in this exhibit, and where did they come from?
I'm going to throw that one to Danny. How many items are in the exhibit, Danny?
We have over 300 objects, documents, and graphics that are making up the exhibition. And they come from almost entirely from the Missouri History Museum's collection. And we brought in some from other institutions around the state and even nationally. But this really is a telling of the story of the Civil War in Missouri that is drawn almost entirely from our collections.
Let's look at 3 pictures from the current exhibit, the Civil War in Missouri. And Elizabeth, you might comment on what we're looking at when they come up on the screen.
That is actually one of our actors. That's Barnes Bradshaw, who works with us at the Missouri History Museum and does short plays having to do with the Civil War during the run of this exhibit. This particular one is his Union recruiter play, where he actually plays the role of the men who went out to try to get men to sign up, which was a task that actually became more and more difficult as the war went on, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Let's look at a couple more here. I think we have some from the...
That's me. Getting ready to do another play having to do with Missouri's history. We do these 20-minute plays every Saturday at 2 o'clock and every Tuesday at 3, and then we add performances during the summers.
Is that from your own wardrobe? Or?
That is not from my own wardrobe. We actually had those costumes commissioned. This is from inside the exhibit. This is one of the screens at the introduction that talks about different people in Missouri, what their position was at the beginning of the war, what they sort of hoped would happen in the war, and then at the end of the exhibit, those people are revisited again.
Let's look at one more.
That is another position in the gallery. I believe that the uniform, that's actually me in the back that you can see, and my daughter, Lydia. And we are looking at a uniform of a gentleman who was at the Battle of Wilson's Creek. And actually, there's a tiny artifact there that I think is one of the most amazing. It's a pocket watch that actually stopped a bullet and saved this man's life.
No kidding. Wow. You know, when we first showed that first picture of the actor dressed in costume, it made me think I've forgotten how many people are really interested in the Civil War and how many people get involved in those reenactments. Maybe you would know more about it than I do, but hundreds of people do it every year, don't they?
I would say thousands, really, and it is an incredibly popular pastime. I always think when we have to do a play having to do with the Civil War, we're lucky because it's easier to find props and costumes and all of those things because of the enormous reenactor community here in the United States.
You ever been involved in that, Daniel?
I haven't myself, but I have attended some of them. We had a great reenactment of Camp Jackson that was down at Jefferson Barracks a few months ago, and it is incredible what they're able to do, and their content knowledge of everything down to what types of buttons were on a particular uniform.
Well, before we take our break, let's talk a little bit about slavery in Missouri. Do we know when it actually started, and how many slaves were here at one time? What can you shed some light on that?
Sure. Well, slavery has been a part of Missouri since the beginning of European settlement here, and certainly since the beginning of statehood. And we came into the United States through the Missouri Compromise, which is this really divisive debate over the future of slavery in the United States. We eventually are admitted in this kind of compromise that brings in Maine as a free state and Missouri as a slave state. But it continues to shape who Missouri becomes. As the war approaches, the issue of slavery, and in particular the issue of slavery expansion, begins to kind of shape tensions around the state. And you kind of start to see these divisions form between rural Missouri, which continues to be tied to slavery, and St. Louis, which is increasingly industrial and certainly mercantile. It's becoming a commerce center. And so slavery becomes at the center of these debates, and St. Louis becomes a Union bastion. Much of the rest of the state becomes embroiled in this guerrilla warfare.
Most of the slavery
that we were talking
was in
about.
rural areas, as I understand. Do we know how many slaves there were at one time, the most? Do we have any idea?
I'm not sure, but I do know that we had, at the end of the war, when slavery was ended, 100,000 slaves, over 100,000 slaves were freed.
Wow.
The exact
Sounds
number,
like a lot.
it was 10% of our population at the beginning of the war. So 10% of the population was
That's
slaves.
fascinating. We're going to continue this discussion in a minute. The Civil War in Missouri is an exhibition, an exhibit at the Missouri History Museum. It runs for about another year until March of 2013. We'll continue the discussion right after this.
You promised me the world. Is this what you had in mind?
Every choice we make has a consequence. Help EarthShare and its members restore balance to the world. Visit earthshare.org and see what you can do. EarthShare, one environment, one simple way to care for it.
I heard someone ask the other day, how did that law ever pass? But they never even contacted their legislator. My teacher says legislators are concerned about what people think and want to hear everyone's opinion, even mine, and I can't even vote yet. People ask, where's my voice? To me, it's easy. You can call, write, or email your elected officials anytime and let them know how you feel about an issue. Am I missing something?
Learn how you can make your voice heard by logging on to representativedemocracy.org.
I'm Steve Potter, and welcome back to City Corner. We're talking about the Civil War in Missouri. That's an exhibit at the Missouri History Museum, and with us is Elizabeth Pickard and Daniel Gonzalez. And the exhibit opened last year, I think it was November. Will run through March, is it 13th? March 16th of 2013. And one of the really neat things, it was in January, Metro Theater Company, Carol North I know very well, who runs, I guess, did she found it? I don't know, she's been with it for a long time.
She's the artistic director.
Artistic director, right. They came up with a play, and I want you to explain how this all happened. It's called Battle Drum, and it ran at the Missouri History Museum for, was it a month almost?
Just about a month, yes. So
okay, how did all this happen?
at the Missouri History Museum, we have a series of local professional theater companies. The series is called Missouri History Museum Presents, and local professional theater companies submit proposals to us, and we look at our upcoming exhibitions, we look at our mission, what would be the best tie with other programs, and we choose usually 4 shows a year that then are produced in the Lee Auditorium at the Missouri History Museum. And Battle Drum was the proposal by Metro Theater Company. They have, of course, as you well know, a tremendous reputation. They do incredibly strong work. And this was a perfect tie with the Civil War exhibit. And we also really strongly want there to be at least one performance of those 4 that's geared towards school and family audiences.
Right.
So they were just a perfect match, and we were thrilled to have them.
Daniel, did they use you in any way as a resource?
Battle Drum, the Metro Theater Company themselves, they did their own research. I was able to meet them and talk to them as the performances went on, but no, they had a great content knowledge coming in.
Well, we were talking about in the first part of the program, one of you mentioned, I think it was you, Elizabeth, we referred to the young age of some of the kids that were involved. They may not have been pulling triggers, but they were sure they're in the front line. Right, Daniel, and that's what Battle Drum has to deal with. So before we get to that, just talk a little bit about that, how there were teenagers and pre-teenagers that were pretty much on the front line.
Yeah, so each company in the Union Army had 2 musicians, a drummer and a fifer usually. Drummers were usually young boys, could be as young as 9 years old. The official rule was you had to be 18 years old to join either the Union or Confederate Army. But very often that was not the case. This was a time before driver's license and Social Security cards, so a lot of people were allowed in under 18. As young as 12 years old, some commanders would just turn a blind eye and allow young people to enlist. So young people were contributing in really substantial ways.
But they were in particular danger, weren't they? Because the drums were used to coordinate troops and things, so they were in the target of the enemy.
Yeah, that's right. So the drum was used to signal all sorts of commands, to retreat, to charge, even in camp, to go to sleep, to wake up. So they definitely were. If you were able to shoot the drummer boy, you could throw the army off balance. They would lose their command signal, so certainly they became a target.
Huh. Well, we have a clip from Metro Theater Company's production of Battle Drum. This was recorded by Higher Education Television, our friends at HEC TV. And Elizabeth, why don't we watch this, and when we're done, you can kind of comment on what part of the show this came from. This is Battle Drum.
Well, the food's not good,
Volume, please.
but it's food. We could transfer you to a regiment headed north, but you earn your keep in the Army, and I expect we'll keep you drumming. 5th Division, 4th Regiment, 3rd Platoon, 3rd Drummer Boy, on reserve.
Don't want to drum, sir.
But I already heard you drum.
I don't want to be a drummer boy. I can't fight no man's battles. That's what I believe. That's how I was raised.
Well, if you won't drum, what good are you?
I can read.
You cannot.
I said I can read. I can read.
You can read?
I taught myself, sir.
How'd you teach yourself how to read, Mr. Washington?
I was slave to the new little master. He was 4 and I was 6, come time to learn reading and writing, and I was right beside him. But black with a book in your hands, you get a licking with red pepper and salt rubbed in the wounds to learn you're good. So I'd wait till night and light a pine torch and get a hold of that Webster's Blueback Speller, teach myself under the blanket.
Very resourceful, Mr. Washington.
Thank you, sir.
Well, now prove it. Let me hear you read.
Read what?
I got this letter. It was in the jacket, sir. It's a love letter.
We shouldn't have, sir, I know. That's all right, Mr. Jackson. We take our comfort where we find it. Read the letter, Mr. Washington.
From the beginning? Dearest Amanda, I witnessed a painful sight this week. The shooting of two...
Well, that's not the letter.
That's what it says.
No, sir. It starts, my precious only darling.
Let me see the letter. Dearest Amanda. That's what it says. Keep reading, Mr. Washington.
I witnessed a painful sight this week. The shooting of two federal soldiers tried for desertion.
Desertion. What's that?
Running away because you quit, because you're yellow.
Or scared?
Want no part of it. They run. Dishonor.
Found guilty of desertion and sentenced to be shot.
Shot? They kill you for it?
Kill you dead. Infantry marched in formation surrounding the prisoners. 8 men shouldered 2 empty coffins, waiting for the execution.
No, that's not what the letter says. That letter's a love letter from her to him and all about love. Jackson read it to me.
I made up what I read, sir. I don't know how to read.
I see. Mr. Washington, how's your penmanship?
My mama always said I write like a girl.
I think you'll do just fine. My secretary is bound to read my correspondence and write my replies. Can you do that?
Yes, sir.
There you go. Secretary and third drummer boy on reserve.
But, sir,
You like this elephant, Mr. Washington?
Yes, sir.
I made it myself. Here, keep it.
Thank you, sir.
You men are dismissed. Good night.
And that is from Metro Theater Company's production of Battle Drum, which was on stage at the Missouri History Museum as part of their The Civil War in Missouri exhibit. And we want to thank our friends at HEC TV for letting us use that footage and sending it over. We appreciate that. So, what did we just see, Elizabeth?
So that was a scene from Battle Drum where the 3 drummer boys have been brought in front of the corporal. One of them has been with the company for quite some time. He's the first drummer boy. He's very proud of that fact. The second is a young man whose family's been burned out of their farm in Kentucky and is basically picked up as an orphan. He's got no place to go, and he sort of has no choice but to be there. And as you can imagine, his presence there as the second drummer boy is sort of challenging that of the first. And then finally, there is what were called in the Civil War a young man who was a contraband, an enslaved person who's fled across Union lines to try to claim his own freedom. And he has also been picked up by this company. And what's going on in that scene is that there's a letter that is in this coat that's been taken off of a dead body for the second drummer boy who's too cold at night and shivering. And he asks the oldest one to read it. Well, the oldest one goes into these, "My precious only darling, this letter is a love letter, and isn't it wonderful?" And then they're asking the third young man, George Washington, the escaped slave, if he can read, and he says yes. And he reads the letter, and it turns out that that's not at all what it says. He's the only one of the 3 who can read.
Danielle, a little historical perspective. Why were kids this young involved in the Civil War? Where were their parents? And why would they even do it? Was it patriotism or some reason I'm not thinking of?
Yeah, in some cases, actually, the parents were the ones sending them off. They were receiving money in return, sometimes as high as $300 in return for sending their child off to enlist.
They did it. They sent their 12-year-old son off for money.
In some cases, yeah.
And in fact, in the play, that's the situation that the oldest boy is
Wow.
in, that his family needed the money, and they heard that they would get money as an enlistment bonus, so off they took him.
Wow. Well, we hope people will see this exhibit. It's up for about another year till March 16th of 2013, the Missouri History Museum, so there's a lot of time for people to see it. A couple more things I want to ask you about, Daniel. Missouri was significant in the Civil War for, I guess, a lot of reasons. For 2 battles that I can think of, right? Just tell me if I got this right. Wilson's Creek, which is down outside of Springfield, was the first battle west of the Mississippi, and then I think Westport and Kansas City Was that the largest battle west of the Mississippi?
Yeah, so Wilson's Creek was early in the war in 1861, and this was after the Confederate-leaning state government had been kind of pulled from power. Nathaniel Lyon, who was in charge of Union forces within the state, chased them across the state to Springfield, where the Confederate forces, the state militia forces were able to join up with regular Confederates. So you had a Union force now that was outnumbered by Confederates. And Nathaniel Lyon, the head of Union forces, was killed at this battle, along with thousands of others. And it ended up being a real catalyst for the violence that this war was going to bring. So this was really the reason for the creation of a lot of these organizations.
We've got a couple more images from the exhibit. Let's look at that in the time we have remaining, Elizabeth, and you can comment on them quickly.
This is one of the interactives in the exhibit. There are several of them throughout the museum, throughout the exhibit, and these are especially popular with our younger visitors. There's one where you have to build a gunboat, and can you make it heavy enough that it's armored and safe from being blown up very easily, but light enough that it will still float. And then this is another section of the exhibit that focuses, I think, on the different sort of irregular parts of the forces that we're fighting.
We're going to have to leave it there. And if people want to find out more, they've got lots of time. Go to the Missouri History Museum and check it out yourself. Also, we'll have information coming up, and there's that dedicated website that you have too that people can find out more information. Daniel Gonzalez and Elizabeth Pickard, thanks so much for joining us. And it's a fascinating topic and one that could be discussed for hours, I think.
Thanks for having us.
You bet.
Thanks a lot.
I'm Steve Potter. That's all the time we have for City Corner. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye.